Welcome back to High Class Gear. Get yourself ready for another great video. You won't find anyone with more realistic and intriguing stories from the big 80s and the weird 90s than this channel. If you came here looking for something strange, creepy, car chases, police fights, stupid mistakes that came back to get me, or even for a little bit of knowledge, you've definitely come to the right place. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you stay up to date with all the great content coming your way. The following story takes place in the year 1982, when I was 8 years old. I had just arrived on the second day of public school after having been removed from homeschool and forced into the bus programs. In this time, the last parts of segregation were destroyed and the new battleground switched to redlining and benign neglect. I walked into a class of around 30 students and was able to find a desk. My school suffered from massive overpopulation, and if you didn't get there early, you had to stand at the table or sit in the back on the floor. Class sizes sometimes swelled to 60 children. Today, I'd made it. I was early. I grabbed a front row seat and decided to move closer to the projector. That thing looked cool, and my family had one at home. We'd sometimes put it together or disassemble it with my parents supervising it to learn how it worked and how to feed in the projector film. The thing was so neat, and it gave you hours and hours of enjoyment. I wonder what we'd be studying today, I thought with excitement. I would find out soon enough. Once the bell rang, the children that had been able to grab one of the desks did so. The rest had to lean on a friend's desk armrest, snatch a piece of floor, or sit near the oblong table at the back. But we were here. The class teacher, Mrs. October, stood at the front of the class with all the self-entitled poise of a war general and stared down at us imperiously. She explained how we as a class had to remember that the threat of communism was real, that we had to understand the world we were living in. Then she looked at me and some of the Mexican kids in the class. Some of you haven't had the full benefits of an American education and so are sadly behind. But don't worry, this film applies to you too, she said while waving her hand in a circle and looking down at me before giving me a boop on the nose like a German Shepherd puppy. The old, white-knuckled tramp, I thought to myself. I settled back down and started to listen to the presentation, which was followed by the overhead projector film. My favorite part. Hit the lights. Turn off the lights, you little devil. Do you know English? Mrs. October pointed to one of the Mexican kids who sheepishly arose and trotted over to the wall before turning off the light switch. The rest of the class snickered at him. The film showed a Soviet soldier with a pail of red paint and pouring it over a spinning globe, symbolizing the onward march of communism and the threat it posed to world peace. But there was one nation that could halt its progress. There was one civilization capable of retarding the black march of the goose-stepping soldiers of the USSR. It was America. Specially chosen by manifest destiny and the God of nature, America had a special mission in the world to be the protector of justice and to restrain the tyrants and oppressors no matter who they might be. Halfway through, the bell rang for recess and the teacher flicked the lights back on. We'll watch this and another film when you return. Remember, you have extended recess today. I want you to get ready so that when you come back you can be focused. Go ahead, class. She waved us out like cattle in front of an open stable door. We flew outside onto the playground, playing kickball soak'em, swinging on the swings, running the opposite direction up the slides, and racing each other on the monkey bars. Halfway through our extended recess, we heard the sound. It was a sound we all knew. If you were in a class in the US during my childhood, you'd see a large red button in your classroom. That button would go off once a day. That was your nuclear drill. When you saw it, you were to dive under your desk and protect yourself from the coming nuclear holocaust. By ducking down and covering your head and rolling into a ball, you had some hope of surviving the fallout of a nuclear exchange between the US and the USSR. If you heard it outside during recess, you were to drop everything and immediately run back to your class. The nuclear drill horn filled you with dread and you knew to get in. Whoever did not get in the class in time was locked out for some minutes, effectively being virtually killed by the nukes. Once you were admitted back, you had to stay back in detention for however many minutes you were outside. I'd heard the horn gearing up and my Mexican friend and I began sprinting for the door. We'd made it to Mrs. October's class and she grunted at us while we took our places at our desks. 4 students had failed to make it back in time, 2 girls and 2 boys. Ha ha! You're gonna get nuked! You're vaporized! One of the students laughed and pointed. The The nuked kids slapped their hands against the thick doors and looked in through the glass and could proceed no further. My friends and I laughed at their perceived fate. We returned to the overhead projector film and the teacher gave us a short presentation on the second film. When it started, the whole attitude of the classroom changed. The film showed clips of nuclear bombs hitting, smoke mushroom clouds rising in the distance, growling in the sky with a rumble that made my stomach queasy. The narrator in this film talked about the fallout of nuclear war, the possibilities of what could happen in the war, the impact of when the bombs first land. Depictions of skin melting, skulls liquefying, people vaporized into little more than shadows, all made me pause. This wasn't just hypothetical though. We were shown footage of the US strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the aftermath, including before and after pictures to drive the point home. It then cut to footage of Ronald Reagan giving a press conference. He seemed almost proud when saying that the United States had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 15 times over, which was way more than the Russians. He threw in for extra bragging rights. I looked around the class and most of the children were celebratory, excited and punching the air. "Yeah, we've got the most nukes, we're beating the commies!" One child punched the air in victory, which was met with a crooked smile from Mrs. October. Who the hell is we? I thought. This guy doesn't even have his own lunchbox, but he's bragging about a nuclear arsenal that could finish us all. We were then shown additional nuclear tests the US did in faraway islands, even some that were done in America. Wait? The US set off nukes here, I thought? Indian reservations, island chains in the Pacific Ocean and more all had nuclear tests done. Some even had soldiers run through the fallout to study radiation exposure. I felt lightheaded. I couldn't take it anymore when the film depicted side-by-side photos of 5 cities in the US, and 5 in the USSR that would be affected by the first nuclear strike between the superpowers. There would be a nuclear winter for years, people would be living underground, and only after a long time would we as mankind be able to repopulate the surface again. I'd been to a few local bomb shelters in preparation before, but this movie added a level of reality to these rituals that scared me. I thought of the bombs dropping, my mother's face liquefying, the plastic in my toys melting into goo. I even started thinking about the people that were caught outside in the nuclear drill. They'd be nothing but black shadows against the wall. Where was the sense in all of that? I promptly threw up in the garbage can next to the classroom entrance door. I'd made it just in time. The sound of my heaving and the liquids hitting the can brought over Mrs. October. She was not sympathetic at all. "So, this is the time you choose to do this. I'd have expected more school spirit from you," she said while clicking her teeth in disgust at my state. I'd disrupted the whole class. The Mexican student had to turn the lights on. That was his only job. I only knew him as the Mexican kid that turned the lights on. Mrs. October gave him no other identity. Most of the students were annoyed that I'd ended the film through my supposed weakness, but 1 or 2 of them shared my sentiments silently. "That film was pretty weird, man," one of the kids told me over lunch. He offered his Super Sip drink to me as a peace offering, and I gratefully accepted it before giving him half of my peanut butter sandwich as a thank you. I wasn't alone in feeling uneasy about the projector films from the day, especially the second one. That all mankind could be destroyed by one stroke of a button and by our own hands made me worry for my family. Once lunch ended and we were back in the classroom, Mrs. October split us into groups after we finished the second movie and had to engage in discussion about what to do about the Russian problem and how to stop them. I didn't contribute much and mainly just looked and listened. I wondered if the Russians felt as scared as we did. They were coming to the 1984 Olympics. I wonder if all the Russians are having to memorize the 10 capitals, 5 in the US and 5 in Europe, to know which ones will be hit in the first exchange. Did they have to study it like us? All I could remember from the projector was Reagan talking and threatening people. There was only one black and white reel of Nikita Khrushchev yelling at the United Nations and banging the podium while he spoke. Was he really as crazy as Reagan was? The bus ride home that afternoon was festive for everyone else, but I had questions for my parents and extended family. After walking in and hanging up my jacket and book bag, I got down to business. "Are all of you and me going to die in a nuclear strike?" I quizzed the room while looking around. I wanted answers, and I wanted them fast. My mother stopped kneading the dough for tonight's bread, and shot me a look of alarm while my father got up from his table and walked over to where I was standing. Both at the same time asked me to explain where this question came from. I broke down and told them about the films, the nuclear holocaust to come, the subsequent nuclear winter, the maniac Ronald Reagan who could blow up the world 15 times over, and Nikita Khrushchev with his shoe in hand. I rattled off all the details I could remember incoherently while my mother rubbed my back to comfort me. I think I must have been hysterical. It took all evening for them to explain to me how most of the Clash of Civilizations talk was gibberish, and that the Russians and USSR didn't exist just for world destruction. They explained that the US flattered itself thinking it was the sole objective of anyone's thoughts, or the world's envy, and that the Russians were like any other people. They had toys, played games, lived in houses. They spoke a different language and had a different culture, but like everyone else on this planet, they wanted to live without invasion from another power. They also had a government, and their government did things like invade Afghanistan, assert communist ideals in the Arab world. In fact, they were the reason we left to come to the US. The US did the same thing in the world. I'd heard the word propaganda. I'd even looked it up with my father in the dictionary. But this was the first time in conversation it was practically applied. I learned that night about propaganda, how it shapes minds, attitudes, and can often be used to persuade people to do things they would not normally even dream of doing, like killing their fellow man and so forth. Many years later, I now see the same propaganda at work. This time we're being told to fear the Russians yet again, but also the Chinese and many others as part of some worldwide global plot. I guess what I learned that night was that propaganda can be used as a tool by any group, and the first losers are the victims of it. Those victims can be those who are brutalized under that propaganda, or maybe even those who are convinced to commit it. I feel like I've come full circle having lived this long. If you enjoy these videos and what we do here, subscribe to the High Class Gear channel, give us a like, and hit the notification bell so you always get updates on new content every week. Stay safe out there.